Gene therapy. Gene therapy involves altering the genes inside your body cells in an effort to treat stop disease. Genes contain your DNA, the code that controls much of your body's form and function, from making you grow taller, regulating your body systems. Genes that don't work properly can cause disease.
So, what exactly is gene therapy? First, let's start with the basics. This is a gene. Genes are made up of DNA, which are the blueprints to build the enzymes or proteins that do the work for your body. As far as we know, humans have between 20,000 and 25,000 genes. And most people have 2 copies of each gene, inherited from each of our parents. They are the building blocks of our physical makeup, from the color of our hair, to our athletic abilities, to our immune system. But sometimes genes aren't built correctly. And a small adjustment to the DNA within our genes can change how our proteins work, which can affect how we breathe, walk, or digest food properly. To better understand how genes change, here's Dr. Michelle Kalos.
So our genes are mutating all the time as a result of chemical processes in the cell, as well as external influences like ultraviolet light. We can also inherit mutations from our parents. Now, when we wind up with these mutations, they can sometimes cause disease, and that's really where gene therapy comes in.
If genes are like the blueprint to our body, gene therapy can fill in some missing drawings. Gene therapy is the introduction, removal, or change in genetic material, specifically DNA or its molecule cousin, RNA, into the cells of a patient to repair or change a gene to treat a specific disease. The transferred genetic material then changes how a protein, or a group of proteins, is produced by the cell. It can reduce levels of certain disease-causing proteins, increase production of disease-fighting proteins, or even produce new or modified proteins within the cell. You may be curious how a gene, and the genetic material it holds, is transferred to the cell during gene therapy. Well, a gene cannot be directly inserted into a cell. Instead, a carrier, also known as a vector, helps deliver the gene. Typically, viruses are used as vectors because they've evolved to be very good at sneaking into and infecting cells. But in this case, their motive is to insert the gene, or genes, into the cell. The infectious part of a virus is removed, allowing it to still enter the cell's nucleus without making the patient sick. It's worth noting there are 2 kinds of gene therapy, in vivo and ex vivo.
In vivo gene therapy, the genes are introduced directly into the patient's cells while the cells are still in the patient's body. In ex vivo gene therapy, cells are removed from the patient's body, then the genes are added to those cells in the lab, and the cells are then returned to the patient. The right approach depends on the disease that the patient has and the tissue that's affected, and that would tell us which is the best way to approach this.
Advances in gene therapy research allow us to treat and hopefully someday avoid rare and debilitating diseases.
How does gene therapy works? Gene therapy works by replacing or inactivating disease causes by genes. In some cases, gene therapy introduces new genes into the body to treat a specific disease. With gene therapy, doctors deliver a healthy copy of genes to cells inside the body.
The goal of gene therapy is to treat disease at the genetic level or the source. There are two types of gene therapy. These are the somatic cell gene therapy and germline therapy. Now, the somatic cell gene therapy is a transfer of a section of DNA to any cell of the body that doesn't produce sperm or eggs. And effects of gene therapy will not be passed on to the patient's children.
Germline therapy. Germline therapy is when DNA is transferred into the cells that produce reproductive cells, eggs or sperm, in the body. This type of therapy allows for the correction of disease-causing gene variants that are certain to be passed down from generation to generation.
So we all know gene therapy replaces a faulty gene or adds a new gene in an attempt to cure disease or fight your body's ability to fight the disease. So the question is, how does it work? Well, there are two methods to achieve gene therapy. One, replacing a disease-causing gene with a healthy copy of the gene. This one is pretty self-explanatory. In this method, the doctor creates a healthy copy of the gene and replaces it to the defective one. Number two, inactivating a disease-causing gene that is not functioning properly. In other words, the doctor will turn off the functioning defective gene through a process called gene regulation. And those are the two methods on how gene therapy treats diseases.
Here are some advantages of gene therapy. First is provide options. Second, long-lasting effects. Third, positive effects passed down through generation. And lastly, rapidly changing technology.
These are the disadvantages of gene therapy. First, expensive. Gene therapy can be extremely pricey, making it inaccessible for some people. For example, Zolgensma, a gene therapy to treat spinal cord atrophy, is the most expensive medication in US. It costs $2.1 million for a course of treatment. Second, experimental. Gene therapy is relatively new and there is a lot about it that we don't know right now. There are no guarantees. Exactly how a successful gene therapy will be is still uncertain. Third, potentially dangerous. There is some concern that if gene therapy reaches other cells in the body besides the faulty cells, it could have harmful effect. There's also concern that reproductive cells could be changed without detection and cells could be passed on to people's children. Fourth is ethical issues. Some people have ethical issues with gene therapy. For example, some wonder who will decide what good and bad. Uses of gene therapy are: will gene therapy make us less accepting of people who are different? May it cause infection? Some gene therapy use inactive viruses to carry healthy genetic material into a faulty cells in the body. It's possible that those viruses could infect the person receiving the therapy.